Joining us, especially in these sleepy after lunch, hours. Yeah, our panel, it's titled Planetary Urbanization and the War Against the Peasantry, and Michelle Lucas and I co-organized it. Basically, our basic idea was to bring together two fields of studies that have developed very interesting, very generative studies, but that haven't had engaged in a dialogue amongst them: urban studies and agrarian studies. And so there are many problems in the contemporary global world, like the rise of shanty towns, precarious settlements, that cannot be understood without understanding agrarian transformation. So the idea is to bring this, two generative approaches into dialogue. And I don't know if you want.
I think what we propose is just like an expression of maybe a general tendency towards more relational and dialectical thinking, and to relate bodies of literatures or theoretical exploration that were disconnected before. And so this is maybe a first step of many others that try to link discussions that were disconnected. And actually we had two sessions, one more focusing on the peasantry and the formerly known space as countryside, and some more urban issues. Now we have one session with three very interesting presentations. Amaranta Herrero from GNOC, Center for Biosafety, the Everyday Struggle Against the Expansion of GM Crops in Spain, the Story of Social Resistance in Stop Motion. Nikolaos Katsikis, University of Luxembourg, Planetary Urbanization and the Geographies of Ecological Surplus. And Nadine Reis will finish, University of Bonn, A Farewell to Urban-Rural Bias, Peripheral Finance Capitalism in Mexico. So every presentation 20 minutes, and then we have 20 minutes for discussion.
Okay. Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Amaranta, and well, I want to tell you a little bit my background, because I work in an interdisciplinary field. I am myself an environmental sociologist and an agricultural engineer. And the subdisciplines I move around are rural sociology, environmental sociology, science and technology studies, and political ecology. So that's a little bit my field of expertise. I'm going to present two things in this session. I'm going to present you a paper we've published, me and my colleagues, on the everyday struggle against the expansion of GM crops in Spain. And I also would like to present you an animation movie we've made out of the paper as a way to relate, engage, and connect with wider audiences beyond the academic bubble. So I think that's all. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Doesn't work. I see the change here, but not there.
Okay.
Maybe you remember you said it's open to times. Maybe the one projected
there is the second. Yeah. Maybe close one. So but which one is there?
Maybe this one. If I do like this.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Okay. So modern agricultural biotechnologies have generated fierce sociopolitical conflicts around the globe. And in an attempt to appease these conflicts, Europe has put considerable weight on the concept of coexistence. I say this because this is a picture from 2005 in Catalonia, and it illustrates a little bit the topic I am going to talk about, the socio-ecological conflict I am going to talk about, which is the conflict between genetically modified agricultural crops and non-genetically modified crops, especially organic crops. And this is the picture of an action made by a farmer, an organic farmer, and a very small scale organic farmer, whose crop was contaminated by GM pollen. And when he found out, he decided to make an action of protest and burn his own crop, losing some money in that, but as a way to denounce the existence of this genetic contamination. So basically, Europe, in an attempt to appease this conflict, has placed considerable weight on the concept of coexistence, which refers to the simultaneous production of organic, conventional, and genetically modified crop systems without economic discrimination from one to the other. The nature of GM crops, however, has proven to be increasingly expansive and oppressive, as the unintentional spread of GMOs contaminates both conventional and organic crops through different ways. The pursuit of what is called coexistence has therefore created new unresolved frictions between stakeholders of the different agri-food systems, trying to access, gain, or keep a market share, as well as maintain and advance the possibility of alternative agricultural futures. So basically, the politics of biotechnology has also been referred as biohegemony, as a kind of biohegemony, meaning in which there is an alignment of material, institutional, and discursive power, which benefits the prevailing capitalist model of industrial agricultural development. In this presentation, I'm going to highlight and develop and elaborate on the material dimension of power in relation to the appropriation of physical infrastructures of agricultural systems by the genetically modified system, and the biological agency of plants. That's also another aspect. So basically, GMOs are considered as different, has been legally designated as different types of entities than the crops that are used in conventional and organic agri-food networks. This difference is created and enforced by the system, by the patent system which sustains them. In some countries, this difference is also asserted through the creation of compulsory labeling schemes and the different markets that these enact. GMOs, however, are not easily contained and regularly spread into other crop types and agri-food networks through the unintentional admixture of seed or grain, or through genetic crossing via pollen flow. This so-called genetic contamination destroys the market for those that have specifically defined themselves as opposed to GMOs, such as the organic sector. The involuntary and uncontrolled spread of GM crops appropriates different spaces of rural contexts and displaces other forms of production unless significant measures are put in place to specifically maintain separation between the different production systems. It poses a significant challenge to the ability of alternative models to persist and exist. Also, so far, and in the case of Spain, the cost of attempting to separate the systems are currently being borne by those who can be contaminated rather than by those who contaminate. So given this situation, the question that articulates the presentation is, in context where there is a simultaneous cultivation of GM, organic and conventional crops, how do the social actors from organic and conventional maize agri-food networks manage to maintain and promote GM-free spaces and GM-free markets, despite the spread and domination of modern biotechnologies in Spain? That's the question that articulates. Yeah. So in order to answer these questions, we used a concept developed by James Scott, that he noticed that most studies on political conflicts were focused on spectacular and extraordinary forms of resistance, meaning these were like rebellions, strikes, direct actions, or even wars. But he noticed that besides, in addition to these types of spectacular forms of resistance, there were other more subtle, more quiet, more dispersed, more disguised, or more invisible forms of resistance that he coined as everyday forms of resistance. And these forms are how individuals and groups act in a way that challenge power structures and dominations in their everyday lives. He pointed out that many times in contexts in which confronting power overtly could be dangerous, this could be the only ways to cope and somehow confront oppression. And actually, these are forms that are complementary to other more extraordinary and visible forms. It might be what happens in the intermissions between spectacular forms of contestation. These forms do not imply intentionality necessarily, political awareness or success. It's just forms to survive to the oppression in a way, no? And aim mostly at factor achievements. So what I am presenting, and I forgot to mention, is an empirical research. We've been doing multi-sited ethnography, going through the 2 regions of Spain in which there is the highest concentration of GM crops. And we've been chasing farmers, processing companies, animal cattle farmers. We've been visiting seed banks, all sorts. We've mapped a wide range of actors in the countryside, in the rural context. We've been visiting them, serving them, interviewing them, etc. During 1 year or more. I'm not going to focus on the methodology. If you later have questions, you can ask. But I need to tell you a little bit of the context to understand this story. So basically, Spain is the only country with large-scale cultivation of GMOs in Europe. It's the gate nation of GMOs in Europe. It's the only country. Well, a little bit Portugal, but it's not comparable, the scale of commercialization. There's only one crop. We're talking only about maize, and one which was introduced, GM maize was introduced in 1998. The modification is only concerned to the introduction of a gene from a bacteria that makes the plant that makes the plant become an insecticide plant. That's how it's called. It's the BT maize. And all current varieties include this type of modification. The GM maize is highly concentrated in 2 areas. So Spain has a 28% of GM adoption globally, in the whole Spain. But these 2 areas, which is Aragon and Catalonia, have 70% and 50% respectively of adoption. It's important to know that there's a maize shortfall in Spain, which means that everything that is produced is consumed within the country. And a part of that, there's some imports from abroad. And that maize is not a staple food. It's not culturally grounded in the culture. It's not something, it's not like Mexico, it's not like that. It's maize is a very industrial, maize is a commodity. It's related mainly to the meat industry, but it's found in a wide range of products, which go from drinks, from Coca-Cola, etc., till toothpaste, soaps. It's in the glue. It's in the medicines. It's everywhere basically. But mostly it's related to the meat industry. In fact, 85% of all maize produced in Spain goes to animal feed production, and almost all GM maize goes to animal feed production. We don't have the specific amounts, but maybe some GM maize also goes to the production of biofuel. More on the context. There's no public register of GM fields, which I think it's a recommendation by the European authorities. And what is very striking is that organic agriculture in Spain has experimented a boom in the last years. In all single crops, organic agriculture is expanding, in tomato, in lead, and all single crops, but in maize. And if we see the evolution of organic, conventional, and GM maize, we can see how organic maize is absolutely marginal. This is in Catalonia, not in Spain, in Catalonia. And it has become marginal and has stayed marginal because farmers cannot assume, are afraid to assume the consequences of sowing maize and being contaminated and being impoverished by the contamination, basically. So basically, Spanish organic maize in Catalonia, this only covers the 3% of the demand. The rest has to be bought in France, has to be bought in Italy, which are countries that are GM-free. At the same time, and I say that because making this presentation in public in front of ministries of agriculture in Spain, they normally say that this is because there is no demand of organic maize, but the data says otherwise. You know, there's a wide demand. Well, at the same time, there's no price differentiation between GM and conventional maize, but organic maize is paid almost double. And despite that, organic maize is absolutely marginal. It's important to note the rise and desegregation of Spanish anti-GM movement. And Spain had an anti-GM movement very strongly that grew as in parallel to the introduction of GM crops. The peak of the climax of this movement was in 2005, where there was an attempt to pass a legislation on the rules of coexistence, how to manage this kind of simultaneously cultivate these different crops from different systems, which in the end it didn't pass this law. And since 2005, basically the Spanish anti-GM movement has experimented a decay. Most of the people have gone more to alternatives to the agroecological movement. For instance, it's a thing of generational change. Most of them have children and other things. And the strength, the muscle of the muscle of the movement is absolutely weak. And I was part of that movement. Yeah, and that's important to say it, because that right now it might not appear that there's any opposition, or any visible opposition to GMOs in Spain, but we found that there is this everyday resistance happening. I don't think I have time. Okay. So if we recover the question, how do these social actors in the rural context from organic and conventional maize agri-food networks manage to maintain and promote GM-free spaces and GM-free markets despite the spread and domination of modern biotechnologies? So what we found is that there are different things happening. No? All these things are talking about different social practices that farmers, but not only farmers, farmers cooperatives, processing companies, certification bodies are doing to try to protect their space in a way. So the first thing we notice is that a change in farming techniques. Organic farmers, mostly, and conventional farmers to some extent too, are delaying or advancing the moment of sowing to avoid the possibility of the simultaneously of the growing of the flowering and the cross-pollination moment. However, what happens is that in the case of organic farmers, what they are doing is waiting until all the neighbors have planted their GM maize, and waiting a little bit more to have this gap in time. But when they do that, the soil is warmer, so there are more weeds, and basically their yield is lower. So they are losing money. Also, the cycle of the maize they grow, they don't sell enough varieties of maize for organic farmers, so they cannot really adapt. No? So they have to assume an economic cost if they want to at least not be contaminated. The second thing we saw was the use of economic incentives. There's processing companies that process conventional non-GM maize they call it maize for human consumption, because in Spain, GM maize, again, only goes for animal feed. So these companies, what they do is they use economic incentives to talk to farmers and convince them not to plant GM crops. Okay. Because you're going to see this in the video, I'm going to run, because the video explains all this. So basically, there's use of economic incentives, use of social incentives, there's extensive monitoring. They lower the threshold of contamination, and there's also a strategy of claiming higher status for non-GM conventional maize. I'm sorry. So Well, basically, all these acts, in reality, they are fighting against the threat of non-existence. They are not fighting, they are basically, it's not that they are fighting coexistence. They are fighting the threat of non-existence while maintaining the possibility of a future for alternative agri-food networks. They are a manifestation of everyday politics, which intend to articulate, maintain, and support alternative vision of agri-food's futures in different stages. It's not a black or white. It's not that they are completely revolutionary, some of them, but there's like a lot of nuances. These acts of resistance are seriously calling into question the concept of and push for coexistence as a way to manage the GM controversy. And they create new alliances between actors which have been traditionally confronted, for instance, organic and conventional farmers. The title of this presentation is Everyday Resistance in Stop Motions, because this intend to communicate our research to wider audiences. So we've made a stop motion movie out of the paper, and we've worked with an artist, and we've put it in the social networks to distribute the research. And I'm going to show it to you. It's 5 minutes. I might need 1 minute from my... can you see? Oh, no.